In the last video, we saw how you can add source effect preset chains to sounds, and how you can dynamically bypass, add or remove source effect presets from those effect chains. This is fine if it's being done at the same time that a sound is triggered, but if the sound is already playing, then these changes in the effects can sound a little abrupt. In this video, we'll look at how we can smoothly apply changes to effect parameters and how we can tie these parameters directly to game variables. In the woods on the other side of the lake, that's shortcut key 2 in the demonstration project, there are some puffballs growing. As you can see, these have some dangerous spores floating around them. If the player gets too close, then the puffballs will swell up and pop and cause some temporary damage to the player. We want the sound effects to help illustrate this. The main sound near the puffballs that's going to be affected are the blackbirds in the nearby tree. If we open up that sound cue, you can see that we've assigned the puffball source effect preset chain to that sound. Opening this up, you can see that there are two source effect presets in this source effect preset chain, a delay and a ring modulation. We'll talk about the delay a little later on, but if we open up this ring mod source effect preset and play back the sound at the same time, we can hear its effect. So that effect is going to represent how the player feels having been injured by the exploding puffball. Let's just reset that effect. So dry is 1, wet is 0. So we'll open up that puffball blueprint and we'll see what's going on. So when the player hits the outer sphere of the puffball, something's going to happen that we'll look at in a minute. But then when they get into this inner sphere, the puffball is going to start swelling up and then eventually explode. So that's what this timeline's doing here. It's going to swell up and then go pop. So when it goes pop, we play the sound, we fade out the puffball sound itself. And then here, at the end of that, what we want to do is to apply a change in that ring mod effect. So the first thing we're going to do is to create a new variable. I'm going to call it ring mod. And the type of variable is going to be a source effect preset of the type ring modulation. So source effect ring modulation preset. There's our variable, compile, and that's going to be the one that belongs to this, which is called puffball ring mod. That's the one in our preset chain. So we want to get in and affect that, the puffball ring mod preset. We'll drag it in here. What we're going to do is to set its settings. And if we pull out from this, we can make those settings, and you can see all the parameters that are the same as the source effect preset. Now we want these wet dry levels to change over time. So what we'll do is we'll create a timeline. We'll call it ring mod 1. And when that timeline plays back, it's going to update, and that's going to continually set the settings. So we'll play that from the start here. And now we need to just go into the timeline, create a float track, and enter the range of numbers that we want it to play. So we'll just create a starting point here. So let's think about the dry mix first of all. So when this starts, we want this to be a value 1. So we're getting a completely dry signal. So that's going to start at 0.0. And that's going to come down, let's say, over a couple of seconds. So we'll zoom out a bit and we'll put another point here at 2 seconds. And so the dry value is going to come down to 0. It's going to hold on there for a while, and then I want it to gradually creep up again. So let's say it's going to hold until maybe 5 seconds. I'm just pressing Control to add these points each time. And then maybe it's going to come back up over the next 5. So a nice sort of gradual easing off of that. And it comes back up to 1. So let's just see that as a whole. What happens? We need to reset the length of our timeline. At the moment, the timeline's stopping at 5. We want that to stop at 10. Okay, so when this timeline starts, it starts with a value of 1, comes down to 0, and then about 5 seconds it starts to creep back up again, and we want to just make sure that value, when it gets back up, is back up to 1. So let's rename our track, and we'll call it dry level. Go back to the event graph, and you can see we've got this dry level here, and we can feed that straight into the dry level of the ring modulation settings. Now at the same time, we want the wet level to do the opposite. So what I'm going to do is drag out from that and create a float minus float. And we'll have 1 minus that value, and that will invert it. Let's just put a print string on the end just to check those numbers. And we'll take a look at what the wet level's doing. So in the game, you can see where that inner sphere is there. That's what's going to trigger the puffball to explode, and then that will have that effect, that ring modulation effect. We'll hear that on this bird sound up here. We could add it to some other sounds in the area as well, but for the moment we'll focus on that one. So we're going to enter that inner sphere. So you could hear that ring modulation taking effect on the bird sounds. Let's also apply it to the wind that we can hear in this area. So that's this one here, and I think that one there. Now with these two, they are ambient sound actors, and we could actually apply the source effect chain to those specific ambient sound actors themselves. So puffball source effect preset chain. So they will now be affected by that sound. So let's just play it again. So at the end there, you could just hear that timeline gently easing off those wet dry levels of the ring mod and allowing the sounds to return to normal. The second thing we want to do is to create another effect when the player enters this outer sphere. As you can see, these spores are in the air, and we want to sort of create the feeling that these are affecting the player, maybe disorientating the player a little bit. Now we've already got a delay inside that source effect preset chain here. So we're going to affect that. And what we're going to do is we're going to use the player's distance from the center of the spore to affect that delay. So as the player gets further in, further towards the middle, they're going to get more and more drowsy or disorientated, and the delay on the sounds around them is going to become more obvious. So back in the puffball blueprint, I've already created a variable that's going to hold the reference to that source effect delay preset, and we've done the same thing with set settings, and we can make those settings. Now we want to get player character, and we want to get self, which is the blueprint itself, and we want to find out the distance between them. So we'll go get distance 2. And let's see what values we're getting out of those. So we'll make a print string. We're going to run this off an event tick. So that's going to update every frame. Now we don't want the effect to start taking place until we're within that outer sphere of the puffballs, because that's where these little spores are. So what I've done in this blueprint is the blueprint itself starts without tick enabled. So nothing's going to be coming out of here. Now over here, when we do overlap on the outer sphere, that's when we want to turn that on. So we'll set tick enabled for this actor then this will start firing off and we'll affect the delay. But let's just see those values first. Okay, so we enter the outer sphere. That's going to switch the tick for this actor on, and we should start seeing some readings. There we go. It starts about 1,000. So that's our range of values. So we want to convert that range of numbers from 1,000 to 0, actually to 0 to 1 to control the wet mix of the delay effect. So let's start by dividing that by 1,000. So float divided by float, 1,000. That will get us into a range from 0 to 1. And then we want to invert that again like we did before. So let's find a float minus float, and we'll take that away from 1, and that will have the effect of inverting the numbers. And we're going to send that into the wet level of the delay. We'll just switch off that print string now and just connect that up. Now when our puffball explodes, we want to stop this system and reset the delay. So we want to turn that event tick off. So let's come down here. We've got that puffball exploding here, and you can see we've already set up that set tick enabled to be off. So that stops that system updating. And also here we are again set settings of the puffball delay, and we're setting the wet level back to 0. The other thing we want to do is also actually do that when the player decides to leave. If the player doesn't go up to the inner puffball and it explodes, they might just turn around and walk away. So we've got our tick enabled switched off there already, which is fine, but we just want a copy of that. So we're actually resetting the delay effect at the same time. So we'll pop that in there. And then we'll see how it sounds. So as we enter the outer collision sphere, we enter the area where the spores are. So the tick has now been enabled, and the wet level of that delay effect is being adjusted according to how close we are to the center of this puffball. So you can hear that delay effect there on the birds. And we've actually also applied it to the sound of the puffball itself, those chime, gong type sounds. So if we walk away, you can hear the tick is disabled and the delay settings are reset. And likewise, when the puffball explodes, we get too close. When the ring mod effect wears off, what we should hear is that the birds have returned to normal. In this video, we've looked at how you can control sound effect parameters both through pre-designed curves using timelines and by directly mapping game variables to the parameters. This opens up a huge creative potential, not only for designing your sounds, but in having the nature of those sounds respond to game events and parameters.